And by the way, we'll have a little bit of, if we have time left over at the end, we can also, if there's anything that you feel like is unresolved, we'll have time to deal with that then too. So technique number 2, I love this one because nobody ever tells you growing up that you are not your thoughts and that your thoughts aren't necessarily true. Nobody ever tells you that. But it's like, the thoughts that come through your head, I remember, I think Deepak Chopra had said one time, just think of them as clouds floating by. So we get to choose whether we want to believe each thought that comes into our head or not. So we are the observer consciousness behind those thoughts, and we get to watch and observe what thoughts are coming through. So it requires us to practice kind of a keen awareness that, of constantly reminding ourselves to take a step back into what are those thoughts coming through, and do I want to believe them? Do I want to serve them? Or do they serve me or do they not serve me? So even the thought of, I'm on a pedestal or whatever, that's a thought. It's not necessarily the truth. There is no solid grounded truth. It's just really what we want to believe and what we don't want to believe. So I think sometimes just being able to take a step back can sometimes solve the problem in and of itself. Sometimes that disarms them enough. In the same way that if you were walking down the street and somebody jumps out at you and tries to mug you, that's scary. But if you're in a haunted house and it's like fake, it doesn't, it kind of disarms it of like, oh, I still got startled. That thing that came and attacked me still startled me, but I can recognize that it's not real. So in the same way, just kind of cultivating that awareness that your thoughts truly are just your thoughts and you don't have to believe any of them, that can sometimes be enough to disarm them. But I think this technique works well a lot for, let's say, anything that you have a lack mentality for. So some people that's finances, some people that's a career, some people, for me, that's relationships. So any of those little chronic thoughts that come up, I think it works good for, because I think if we don't stop to recognize how much energy we're dumping into those little cycles of thoughts, we aren't able to deal with them. So I think being able to take a step back and recognize that it's a thought sometimes disarms it. And sometimes you have to take it a step further and maybe do a fear crusher list or something like that for it. But in general, I think it's really helpful in terms of bringing us back to the present moment. So almost all of our thoughts are typically something we're either worrying about that happened or might happen, or future tripping. And so, but our power is what we can do right here, right now. So there was an episode of Oprah's Super Soul Sunday that Eckhart Tolle was on, and somebody had asked him this question, and it stuck with me because I think it's such a great story. If how do we still pay our bills, and how do we get stuff done if we're not worrying about it? And I thought his example was perfect. He said that a squirrel still gathers nuts for the winter, but if the difference between the squirrel and us is that squirrel doesn't worry about it. He just does it, right? So anything that we're doing, like even with bills, you can open the bill. Do I have the money to pay it? Do I not? If I don't, is there a call that I have to make? Just step by step. So we have to trust ourselves that we're still going to do what's best for us, even if we're not worried about it. And we will. In fact, I honestly think we're more effective when we're not constantly in those fear-based thoughts, because once the fear is out of it, we can really see what's aligned and what's not aligned moving forward. So taking the worry out of it, I think, is really beneficial. So for this one, I think the examples that were popping up for me when I was writing this was that I just kept thinking about the thoughts that constantly spin in the back of my head that I don't even realize that I'm thinking of. So the ones that come up constantly for us. I think just recognizing it as a thought really helps. But it also helps if you're in the moment and you're really mad at somebody or you're really upset about something. So often we bring all this future tripping meaning to it. So I'm always going to feel this way. He never listens to me. All these different things. But even recognizing that as just a thought sometimes helps it be like, okay, well, that's not necessarily true or that's not real. But just think of it like a cloud floating through. So for this activity, I wanted you, first of all, this is kind of a four-parter. I wrote it down for you guys. I want you to think of one situation where your thoughts just kind of take over and sort of float around in your head and kind of clog up your energy. And I want you to just be open-minded to the possibility that whatever it is you're thinking might not actually be true. And I want you to list one example of how it is not true. Then what I want you to do, we'll take a few more minutes after that, where I literally just want you to I want you to just let yourself think whatever you're thinking. Maybe you go back to 3 p.m. today and what you were thinking then. And I want you to just feel yourself as the observer behind those thoughts. And I want you to just brainstorm a list, as many thoughts as you think regularly as you can, that come up as little fears and worries. I just want you to write them down. And you don't have to do anything with them right now. We don't have to necessarily deal with them right now. But I think just acknowledging them and kind of seeing where your patterns are in terms of what are those things that you think regularly that tend to bother you. So one of the things I wrote down were like a lot of times if you say like always or never or any of those, like oftentimes those are big ones, but it could be anything that comes up, anything that's coming up now. So we'll take a couple minutes to do the first one, and then a couple minutes to just brainstorm all the different ways we bring those thoughts around and get stuff. Any more coffee? Do you want me to do it?
Oh no, I just didn't know if we were recording. I didn't know.
We're good. I'll pause it. Okay, did anyone have any major breakthroughs or maybe something that you think about frequently that you didn't even realize you think about frequently, or something you never even considered the fact that it might not be true? Anyone come up with anything?
I will share mine, even though it's interesting. That's why I'm sharing.
Yeah, okay.
So, I have these thoughts at work all the time about missing things, about being overwhelmed, about not being able to get everything done, or, what did I miss? What should I have done differently? What should I have done better? Did I make a mistake, or is there something that I should have done? But on the same time, I feel like that serves me in a lot of ways. Like, I found other people's mistakes. I found my own mistakes. I've changed courses of action for the better. Like, I recheck things, I double check them. So, but it's something that I didn't really realize that I did until there were certain times I'd get anxious at work and I wouldn't really know why. And I think it was more because I felt overwhelmed. What if I can't handle this? But then I would, and so I would talk myself through it. I know I can handle it. It's something I'm not afraid of. I'm not worried about. But I think it's that mentality of I don't want to say that I don't think I'm good enough, but I need to constantly be bettering myself in that way. But then I also get mad when I don't come home and I don't study or read or do things like that. So then it's this vicious cycle. I feel like I should be doing things and then I don't. It's totally my fault. And then it kind of just cycles.
So the thing that was coming up, there's kind of two parts of this. I think the thing that was coming up when you were talking about work is that you were saying that you worry about missing a lot of things, but then you feel like it's helped you in a lot of ways because it's helped you catch certain things or things like that. So I think one of the cool things that I think you could work on, which is actually really awesome, and I think we kind of go over it in number 5, but I think starting, you are already doing so much that is benefiting you, so kind of being able to trust yourself, to know that you already are doing those things, and that you already are catching those things, and that you already are catching other people's mistakes. That's all awesome stuff. So I think you can still be doing all those things and you can still be doing all the actions to double check things, but the anxious worry and anxiety doesn't have to be there. And I think the more you learn to trust yourself that you will catch the things that need to be catched. Even for tonight, when I was preparing for this, I kept thinking oh, but maybe I need to say this, or I want to say this, but I just really had to trust that the things that you guys most need to hear tonight are going to come through me, and the things that we all need to hear are going to come through you guys, and the things that are going to benefit us most are going to be said. So I think it kind of comes down to, I know your job is a little different because being in the hospital, it is important kind of life or death stuff. Yeah. It's not just oh, how was this workshop, guys? But at the same time, I think it's still valid to say that you can cultivate a trust process in that to help alleviate some of the anxiety that comes with it. The other aspect of what you talked about in terms of let me just clarify. When you said you come home and you need to study, but you don't, like that kind of stuff that you were talking about. So I think for me, the thing that comes up for that I can best associate with are the times we all do this. We say, I need to work out. I need to read that book. And we don't, right? And so I think it's also recognizing that sometimes we do have a limited emotional energy and we have a limited physical energy each day. And so if there was something that I knew I needed to do, but I didn't, you also have to trust that whatever I did was what I needed to do in that moment. So maybe you didn't study last night, but maybe you went to bed early and that energy helped you be more effective at your job the next day. So whatever you're choosing, I think it becomes a trust process of I think that's why it's so important that we work on fears, because the more we can be aligned with what it is that's really best for us, and we're not letting ourselves get sidetracked by these other things that kind of infiltrate our thoughts and infiltrate our day, and that's when I think we're the most effective. So I think, does that kind of make sense?
It does, but I feel like I think I get mad at myself because I know that if I were to do that and to spend time like every day, which I know I can't do, but that's the only way that I would get to the point where I wouldn't be second guessing myself as much and worrying about that much.
Well, maybe a good layer to start with then is to recognize the guilt that you're putting on yourself. So I think if you take that guilt layer away and you can start to just know that you're still human and you can only do what you're doing, what you can do in a given day, then you might be able to peel that back and start to see what those other fears are underneath that's bringing up that anxiety and bringing up. So is it all relating to like worries that you're not going to know something in your job or things like that? Or what is it that you say, like when you say that you can get to a point where you're not worried about that? What's that?
I think getting to the point where I'm not. I think there's always gonna be, and there always should be a point where you have to think hard and you have to second guess yourself. But the point where I'm not doing that as much, I guess.
I think too. It kind of goes for me. I feel like that sometimes even when looking at my to-do list, it's that trap of feeling like once I get here, then I'll be good, right? So I mean, it's kind of like that whole mindset of what I need to do to be happy or to be good with, or if you're switching jobs or you're worried about disappointing people, there's always going to be opportunities for that. So even if you get to this like imaginary level that you think you're supposed to be at, there's still going to be worries. There's going to be other types of anxiety. Tony Robbins always refers to it as like higher quality problems. So when we deal with we're always going to have problems, but they become better quality problems, and they become, there's bigger things that we're doing with our lives, and you're still going to have problems. Like it's never going to go away. So I think, like Christy, learning to be okay with that and learning to accept that sometimes that is just how you're going to feel, and those feelings are going to come up. There might be other ways to deal with those anxieties and those fears that come with it. So, but again, I think, what you mentioned about how there are some ways where it helps you, I think really taking inventory of why you're doing it and how it's serving you, as well as how it's not serving you, because it's not serving you because it's giving you anxiety, and that's not making you feel good. But you mentioned that there's ways in which it's serving you. So sometimes I think there are things that we come across that maybe we don't want to release, or maybe you're not at a point of feeling ready to release it or to even do work on it. But I think in appreciating it for what it is, that helps relieve some of the anxiety with it. So for me, sometimes if I get overwhelmed or if I'm like diving into something and I'm like really obsessive about it, sometimes that gives me anxiety. But I can also stop and say, hey, these same traits have also gotten me to a lot of good places in life. So it at least, the appreciation somewhat like balances out the feeling of the anxiety and the pressure. So there's there's a lot of different ways of approaching it, and you really just have to kind of feel out which one feels best for you. But I think a big one is just also being able to trust yourself, because even if you studied 2 hours a night every night, I still think there'd be worries that would come up. And if it's not even just about what you know or what your experiences are, there's so many demands in our life. Sometimes we're just too tired, physically tired, to be able to catch everything that comes at us. So I think just starting to learn to be okay with the possibility that you might miss something, or that's just the fact of like, but also strengthening your trust in yourself that you already are catching a lot of those things, I think might help. You could still do the behaviors associated with it without that like tight chest anxiety that we all know and love, right? So.
Can I answer source?
Yeah.
I had the same problem, and so every day I do this thing where I have to say to myself when I get up in the morning, I am enough and I'm doing enough. And I've said this to myself so many times because I do the same exact thing that you do, where I always think, oh my gosh, it's not right, or it wasn't right, or I could have done this better, or done that better, I should have done more of this, no, I'm enough and I'm doing enough. And then like also like Tony Robbins always says like the quality of your life is related to the quality of your questions. So like instead of asking myself like, why was I such a crappy boss today? I ask myself like, how can I be my most incredible tomorrow? Or like, how can I make tomorrow better? Or like, and just ask yourself that are questions, like not questions that are self-defeating, but questions that still enable you to like use your strength of being analytical, and like self-observant, but then also questions that build you up and not questions that break you down.
I love that
Right.
Good
This is why I love workshops. That's perfect. That's so well said. I don't even have anything to add to that. So awesome.
Write that down.
Write that down.
Never
Make
mind.
note. Yeah. But I do think for me, I said this before, I tend to want to fix everything about the way I'm thinking and feeling. So even just what we mentioned in the last 5 minutes is a lot. So instead of trying to do it all and trying to incorporate it all, maybe pick one little thing like what Nikki said about just a morning affirmation or something that can approach it in some small way and layer by layer, little by little. Actually in exercise 4, I have a story that I think kind of relates to how you can shift step by step. That is a lot more, I think it sticks a lot better than trying to say, oh, I want to just completely end all my overwhelm at work. That's a big thing. So I think kind of breaking it down step by step, layer by layer, and just kind of taking the baby steps that'll start to break that down and start to build your confidence that you can start to release the anxiety. Because right now, you have a belief that if you don't feel anxious about it, if you don't feel like you're worrying about it, that it's not going to get done, or you're not doing your job well enough, or you didn't study enough. All those things are kind of related. So there's a lot of like big limiting beliefs there, which, like you said, are serving you. There's not necessarily anything wrong with that. But I think just instead of trying to change that whole belief, just sort of working on little aspects of that can start to build your belief that there are other things that you can also work on. So to say that, like right now you're probably thinking there will never be a point where I don't feel overwhelmed. There were points in my life where I said there's never going to be a point where I'm okay that this happened, or this heartbreak happened, or that there's never going to be a point where I really trust that the perfect person is coming into my life or whatever. But there's ways that we can stepwise build it up, and you don't necessarily have to believe that now, but you'll wake up one day and you'll be like, wow, I changed my belief. So I don't know. There's possibility there, but there's a lot of good stuff to work on. I mean, it's a good challenge to have, and it does, and it forces you to really take a look at where your priorities and energies are in your job, and there's a lot of good stuff there.
Like, it's not a bad overwhelm. Like, it's a good, like, I need that. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I need that for me to better myself.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like a bad
So
thing.
just look at what aspects of that energy are serving you and which aspects are causing anxiety. So there's nothing wrong with a little bit of good pressure if you feel like that's helping you. So you don't necessarily have to feel like there's stuff there that you have to change. But if there's anything that's making you feel not good enough on a day-to-day basis, or like nobody likes that feeling of there's always things that carry over from to-do list to to-do list to to-do list. And you hate those. They just drain you. It's like a giant weight that's been hanging over your shoulder. So those are the things that I think maybe are worth working on. But it doesn't mean you have to completely release your want to improve yourself and work. That's a good thing to have.
So I don't know if what you were talking about, I totally relate with, because we have similar careers, but I had a screenshot of a Christine Northrup quote, which is why I had to go and get my phone, because I thought, oh, this kind of reminds me of this. So she says, it takes far more courage to notice the positive than the negative. You've been conditioned by your culture and the mainstream media to focus on what could go wrong instead of what's working well. What you pay attention to expands, so have the courage to remain positive whenever possible.
I love that.
I really love
Dr.
that
Northrup.
too, because I think it's true. Sometimes it does take more courage to be positive instead of be negative, because you are like so used to
Well, it's like
dwelling in your fears. That's a comfort zone because it's comfortable.
Absolutely.
There's more risk involved in being positive because then you have the risk of the disappointment and failure. So you're like, well.
And another, what Sam said about, the fear of being successful and what we've been trained at. There's so much societal belief crap thrown on us by people that have limited themselves. And so there's a lot at play there that a lot of times we don't even realize. But I think, pulling it back layer by layer really helps. But I absolutely agree with that.
I never thought about that before, like in the sense of like it's riskier to think positive but at the same time it's almost like we think we're being brave by being negative because we're like preparing for the future. Like what if something happens? Like we're almost being brave because then we're like emotionally attached to the outcome and like preparing for it. Oh, we're so brave. But really, I like that idea.
I
Of
really
it,
like
like
that
it's not just like, oh, this is better. It's like, oh no, it's actually riskier, but it's the greater reward as well.
I love the idea too of like the riskiest way to live your life is to play it safe.
Yeah.
There's so much there, and I think that it's something that our fear voice has been conditioned to tell us that if we can foresee a feeling or a situation, that we somehow have control over it. And it's better to have control rather to be caught off guard. So, for example, fear of success, it is easier to just not even try than it is to try and risk disappointment. So in turn, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy because we're afraid to risk getting caught off guard by that feeling that we're giving ourselves anyway. So, even the thought of, oh, I don't want to risk getting hurt in this relationship, but you're keeping yourself away from that, there's a lot there. But I absolutely think it takes a lot of courage to work on ourselves and to be positive and to work on those limited beliefs and shoot for greater joy in life. And that's my goal, I guess. You guys ready to move on to the next one, or is there anything? Okay. So the next one I kind of already harped on a lot, but this was something to me that really helped when I was going through some tough emotional times. And, we've talked about it. That's what we've been talking about. When we force ourselves to flip to the positive, how we're neglecting a part of ourselves that needs to be heard, and, that keeps coming up, right? So, so this is something for this activity. I think if there's something that maybe seems surface level, but you can take a little deeper. So like Sora's example of like, what of this is it me saying that I'm not enough? Or, those things that we can take deeper into the more painful zones than just, oh, did I do this right at work or not? So, but I also think this is really helpful in dealing with stuck emotions that could be something really traumatic, something really sad, something that we're really having trouble dealing with. And what I've noticed is that oftentimes, so I don't really have a fear of being alone in life, but I think my biggest fear in relationships is being left. And I don't know if this relates to like when my separation anxiety when I was a kid or not, but either way, I think sometimes when I'm in a relationship, I have more of a fear of, it not working out. Then I know if it doesn't work out, I'll be good. Like, I'm fine, right? So it's kind of that I think a lot of times the fear of the feeling is worse than the feeling itself. That's not always the case. Sometimes, if we lose somebody we really care about or something really tragic happens in life, sometimes those feelings are just as hard as the fear of the feeling. But I think really going into it and honoring it and just being with it can sometimes allow it to naturally release. So I think when I'm in something where I'm really worrying about something, or let's say going back to that relationship example, if I'm afraid of being left or afraid of what if this doesn't work out or this is going to be heartbreak, I think just sometimes sitting in that and being with it, or if there is something that has come up that's a really tough feeling to deal with, maybe it's that you have disappointed somebody, or that, a relationship didn't work out, or you lost somebody. I think just sitting with that emotion, instead of trying to say, no, I'm going to be positive, or I'm going to focus on this, or we always try to sort of distract ourselves or push it down or not deal with it. But that resistance is what keeps it there. So instead of trying to constantly shove it down, because we're so afraid of just feeling it, like we haven't been taught to just feel it, like that's where I've learned, and it's taken years, but that's where I've learned to appreciate those curl in a ball kind of moments. That's where like the big changes happen, and that's where stuff shifts. And so I think allowing ourselves to really feel it is really important. However, it comes with a disclaimer. And Nikki can tell you the conversation we had about this. She can verify that this was, I remember calling her one day and I was really upset about something. I was like, Nikki, how long do I sit with this? And she's like, until you feel like doing something else. And I'm like, that's a novel thought. Like I had been thinking that I need to sit with this feeling and process it, and trying to like put all these guidelines on how I was processing my emotions, that I was sitting in it and I was saying to myself, oh, there's got to be more there I need to process. No, that's not necessarily true. When you start to feel better, that's great, you did your job. And if you feel badly again 5 minutes from now, then you can go back and feel it again. So I think the disclaimer more has to do with the thoughts that we tell ourselves when we're feeling these things, because we always bring meaning to it. So when I was going through that really tough emotional issue, the relationship issue in the spring, I kept going into that feeling of the heartbreak, and to me, I always get anxiety in my chest, and it's like, ugh, that feeling. And so, like, I was trying to sit with it, and I was breathing, and I was trying to shut off the thoughts about the situation of what happened, and just literally feel it in my body, and be with that emotion, and kind of honor it, and give it time to just do what it wanted. And so I was kind of shutting off the primary thoughts. But then the fear voice was sneaking in the back door saying, oh, look how hurt you are. Like, feel how deep that is. That's such a big scar. It's so deep. It's like how are you ever going to heal that? And so it was these secondary thoughts that come up sometimes when we're just trying to sit with whatever emotion we're dealing with. And obviously I'm talking about something that was really, really emotionally tough for me. But I think that happens even when it's just like something happened during your day that kind of threw you off or caught you off guard, or a disappointment or something. Just sitting with it and just accepting it rather than always trying to flip it right away. And it's just a little bit different of an approach, but it's kind of, we get so afraid of feeling these tough feelings, and we deem them as negative or bad. But I think there's value in recognizing that everything that happens to us, whether it's wanted or unwanted, is for our greater good. So even these negative emotions we grow from, and like I mentioned before, I always feel glad that I can feel sad emotions, and that I cared about something enough to feel sad if it's not there anymore, right? So I think it's just, like I said, it's a different approach, and I think the toughest part is being able to shut off the primary thoughts and the secondary thoughts and all the thoughts that come after that give meaning to that feeling. Like, I think one of the biggest ones that come up for this is, I'm always gonna feel this way, right? Mm-hmm. So anytime we're upset, we can't even imagine, like, it literally doesn't even seem possible that our lives could ever be in a way where we're not feeling that. So I think going into those emotions, sitting with it, validating it, hearing it for what it is, and saying to that part of yourself that's feeling that way, like, I understand you, and I hear you, and I'm willing to just be with you. And I think sometimes then it can naturally start to ease on its own without us having to do all the other work. It's just a different approach. And I think for this one, it has taken me a lot longer. This isn't just like a step-by-step activity I can tell you to do. It was something that took me a lot longer to even gain the awareness, like to even be able to recognize the secondary thoughts, for example, and to actually understand what it felt like to just sit with a feeling, because I just don't think it's something we do often. So I mean, it took me months and months to kind of work up to this, but I think it's really, really useful. And I think sometimes when we're in those deeper emotions, there's there's other ways we can deal with them, and I mean, I think it could be a workshop in and of itself, but like, I use emotional freedom technique sometimes, which is tapping, which is you kind of talk through. There's two reasons I like it. One, you're doing like tapping motions on your body that are supposed to send a calming signal to your brain. So instead of associating these thoughts with the anxiety it normally brings up, you're kind of rewiring your brain to kind of associate it with a more calming feeling. But what I like most about it is that each time you're tapping on a different part of your body, you're also stating something about how you feel. So it forces you to go a lot deeper in terms of giving a voice. I think that's what I'm really looking for, is giving a voice to what those feelings are instead of just trying to change them right away, trying to suppress them. So I just think there's a whole host of ways to deal with this kind of stuff. But I think the first step in it is just that awareness of these tougher feelings. So this exercise is going to be a little different. I want you guys to write out either if there's something recent that happened to you that it was either disappointing, or maybe it's the fear that you will disappoint somebody and you're worried about what that's going to feel like when you have to look in the eyes of those people and feel your self-worth drop or whatever it might be. And so so I think looking at those, anything like that, it could be something that's a worst case scenario that you've been so avoiding thinking about it that you're staying on the surface and not looking as to what is that worst case scenario. Maybe it wouldn't even be as bad as you think. Maybe those feelings that I'm so afraid to feel aren't even as bad as I think. So I think just giving ourselves time. If you want to close your eyes and think about it, that's fine. If you want to jot down some notes on your paper about like what are those big things that maybe you haven't actually given yourself time or permission to just feel, I think just jotting some notes, and then if we can just take a couple minutes and we'll sit quietly, and if there are anything that you want to just give yourself a few minutes to start to feel, whatever it may be, and just sit with it and tell that feeling, whatever it is, that it's okay and it's allowed to have a voice too.
You're in a room full of crying women.
I already
Okay.
cried once, so I broke the ice.
Okay. Yeah. I love crying. I do. Literally.
It is a skill I excel at.
It's one I need to learn. Probably.
Water, if anybody needs water. But does anybody have anything? I feel like that one's a little bit more of a. I totally understand if it's a little more private, but did anyone have any aha moments for that one, or just maybe anything that you raise your hand if there was something that you realized that you don't normally give a voice to, or an emotion that you feel that you don't normally give yourself time to feel. Is there anything anybody wants to share with that one? There's no problem if you don't.
I've got so off track with the topic that I forget where to even start. What was the question? No, that's fine.
I jumped all over
Yeah.
that last one, so it was a lot, I know.
Yeah, so I think that something that came up for me that I hadn't thought about before was that, well, obviously with my kids and like that's all like normal stuff that I normally feel. But like with our business and stuff, like because we moved to a different plateau, because kind of like the level that we were kind of manifesting was kind of like coming to fruition, so we kind of like moved past it and like it freed up a lot of that energy. But I never had this fear of us like not being able to pay our mortgage again. Like I never had that fear again. Like it was like, oh, that was that chapter, like that's over, like I moved past, like I never had that doubt. And I still kind of see the doubt in Sean's eyes sometimes, but I know that that's because that's his stuff that he's still working through. And like sometimes I'll question, I'm like, well, if he's like, am I? No, I'm like, no. But because it, like, I feel different. So I'm like, well, if I feel different, does that mean it is different? That's my question for you. And what I wrote was, if we ever modeled the same pattern, if we ever got to the point where like we couldn't pay our mortgage again, then it would be because something was happening. We were expanding. It wouldn't be because we were doing the same thing again.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's like, well, what if we didn't learn those lessons? And like, what if we are gonna so like, if you feel different, does it mean that it is different?
Yes. So my answer is unequivocally yes. To
Yeah.
But I would say, I'll give you my reason why I believe that. I believe that our life is comprised of what we feel. So this is what you said about Sean feeling a little bit differently is a perfect example that there is no one reality. Like, there's no one thing that's real. It's just all our perceptions that make up our own personal reality. So the fact that your perception has changed, your reality has changed.
Yeah.
Right? And it might not have for Sean.
Yeah.
But I think so often it's when exactly what you said about is it different? I think the underlying fear there is if I'm not preparing for this, if I'm not worried about it, what if I'm missing something? What if what if there's something I could have been preparing for? So
yeah.
I think what I would attribute that to most often is that I think our fear, we all sort of have this limiting belief, or I wouldn't say all of us, but I think it's very common for us to have this limiting belief that if we don't prepare for something, or if we don't worry about it, that these things could come up that catch us off guard. And we never want to be caught off guard, right? We never want to feel something we weren't expecting to feel. We never want to feel hurt if we weren't expecting to feel it. We all want to control everything. We all want to know what's going to happen in the future. And I just think that's very common. So, but I absolutely believe that no worry is beneficial. You can still do the actions to prepare for it. But I think it's a perfect example that you've shifted. And you now trust that the circumstances and the situations are working out that it needs to. And you trust that you guys can handle it if that ever changes.
Yeah.
So with my old job, when I was still working as an engineer, and even though towards the end we knew we might have a year and a half left, and that's the story I tell with my coaching, there were a lot of times leading up to that we were struggling as a company financially, and that there were things that could have changed. And if I would have worried each one of those times that I might be losing my job, I would have expended so much extra emotional energy. I could have wasted time looking at what else was out there to be prepared, and all it would have done was taken away from the stuff that I did in the meantime. But that's an area of my life where I'm actually really good at trusting it's all going to work out. And I don't typically worry about jobs, and I don't typically worry about money, and I'm doing fine, And so I think it's something that I still take the preparatory steps. Like one of the things I did when I was really stressed out and feeling like maybe I can't do this anymore was I made a list of all the things I felt most effective at, when I was most happy. And I was starting to formulate what would I want to do if I couldn't do my job. And there is an element of planning that I do for everything, right? But I don't worry about it at the same time. You can still plan and prepare, but I just think there's so many unforeseen circumstances. So there's a chance that if I would have been worried about losing my job back in the day, that I might have totally missed out. If I would have been in a lack mentality about spending, like, I don't want to spend this extra money because what if I lose my job? I might never have signed up to be a coach, right? And that's my life now. That's what I'm doing full time. So I think if I would have worried and tried, I couldn't have prepared for what I'm doing now anyway, because I didn't even know that opportunity existed. So I think it's just about strengthening your faith, strengthening your trust that the right opportunities will come up when you need it, and strengthening your trust in yourself. But it's like, to me, that's a sure sign that you've done that.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. So the fact that it feels different means it is different.
Okay.
So Sean's the one that's still kind of maybe working exactly what he said, like his issues with that.
Yeah.
Which is fine. We all have issues in different areas of our lives. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, our lives are comprised of the feelings we feel. So regardless of what the circumstances are, there's something that could happen to you that maybe is like really frustrating to you. And maybe to Nikki it's no big deal. And so really, where's the reality in that? It's all about how we react. And if we react well to everything that happens in our lives will feel good and we'll feel in the flow, and that's what we want, right? So I think the fact that you feel differently is a sure sign that it is different.
Okay. Yeah.
Everything fear related is all an illusion, right? There's no point in trying to prep for it. So. Okay, the last two are a little bit quicker. So this one, technique number 4, is a little statement about how I want to feel. And I think what's so important anytime we're dealing with fears or big emotions that we don't want to feel, that we have to have something that we do want to feel or focus on to replace that. Because otherwise, if we're saying, oh, I don't want to feel like I'm in a lack mentality about my career, or I don't want to worry about this, and that's what we're focusing on. So I think instead we have to give our brains something that they can focus on instead. So I had written, this was last November, I had written, when I was going through some of this relationship stuff, I was feeling like I wouldn't be worried about this if I was really trusting that the universe has my back. And so I wrote this statement that it says, I wrote a couple versions of it, but in general it says, I want to be someone who trusts the universe completely, who doesn't get hung up on disappointments, but smiles at them knowing they are all part of the plan. I'm excited about every part of the process and can appreciate every step as it unfolds. It is unfolding beautifully. I'm in the process, so what I want to manifest is already here. It is easy for me to trust. I am full of joy and open to receiving anything the universe sends my way. And I wrote a couple versions of that because I really wanted it to be what feels the best. And so what I did was I wrote this down and I read it regularly, probably once a day for about a month. And I remember calling Nikki one day and I was like, oh my God, Nikki, it worked. I do trust the universe completely. And it was like, I never realized through any of that I was shifting. It wasn't until that one day in the future that I was able to look back and I found this piece of paper and I was like, wow, I did that. Go me. That's awesome. But when writing these statements, I think it's really important that you make it believable. So be careful with your wording. Like I wrote, I want to be somebody who trusts the universe, because I think one of the traps that we get in with affirmations or anything that we're trying to change is if it's too big of a jump, that resistance comes up. So I cannot at this point in my life say, I am certain I will meet the man of my dreams. Because to me, right away what happens? Oh, but what if you don't meet anybody? And how are you going to meet somebody? And all these little, so it's counterproductive because all it does is it's a trigger for all the other fears that come up. So I think you want to write it, like I could say, I am open to believing that the right guy is coming into my life. That I can get on board with. Like there's a difference in the wording and there's a shift in the feelings. I don't know if you can tell that. But there's certain ones that I think make me feel better, make me feel excited. Like, I'm open to that possibility, all right, But then if you take too much of a jump, sometimes it triggers all those what ifs, but what about this, all